All right, what's up everyone? This is Don with Third Creative, and this is the walkthrough tutorial video for old school multi-sport Photoshop template. And in this video, I'm going to thoroughly walk you through all of the layers and all of the processes, and hopefully cover anything and everything that you might need to know in order to create the best images possible with this design. I'm going to be working with the 2x3 vertical. Just keep in mind that everything I do here pretty much is standard and will apply to the other files, such as the horizontals. At the end, we can touch on the memory mate real quick. I think the very first thing I want to do is explain how to convert this from a double image layout, which is how it is by default, to a single image. I think that's probably the most common thing that most of you will be looking for if you're watching this video. So let's touch on that first. Over in the layer panel, you'll see a couple red layer folders. This one here that says lower or single subject image, and then we also have one a little bit lower, which is your upper subject image, and it says turn off for single image. So if you want a single image, we're going to turn this bottom one off, and we'll leave this one on. We will want to move our text up towards the top. So if you select this entire green middle text layer folder, you can use your arrow key or click on one of these anchor points, hold down shift, just click and drag up to keep it centered. You'll probably want it pretty high to make room for your subject image. You can always adjust it later. Now, for the sake of demonstration, let's turn this one off, and let's come down here and grab the subject image that was the upper subject. We'll use it for the single. So I'm just going to move it up into this folder. Now when you place your subject images in this folder, you just scale and position them how you want them. I'm just going to do it quickly. Maybe something like that. Okay, so now you have a single image. Now there is one other thing that you probably are going to want to do. If you come down, let's see here, to the folder, let's see here, the third layer from the bottom, it is a folder entitled Inner Background Layers. And we'll open it up. We haven't talked about the contents of this folder yet, but whichever background option you have selected, you're going to want to move down. In this case, by default, we have this circle option, which it's hard to see. If I turn off the text, you can see this circle option. Turn it back on. Before you move it down, go ahead and click in between this folder icon and the layer mask. That will link it or lock it so that the layer mask moves with it. Now you can click on one of these anchor points, hold down shift, and just click and drag down to the point where you want it. Maybe somewhere right there. Okay, so that is it for setting this up as a single subject image option. Let's go ahead and start from scratch. If I close everything up here, try to get it back in its original state, and we'll just work our way through every single layer and explain how everything works. Starting at the very bottom, we've got change far background color, which is referring to the very far background on the border here. So if I turn that off, you can see where that is applying. To change it, it's very simple. Just click on this box or double click. You'll get a color picker. You can use the slider, or if you have a code, you can just paste it in, and you can pick the color that you want for the very far border background. Next, we have a layer folder that is entitled Far Background Layers. So that is referring to everything around the border that is behind this center frame section. There is a drop shadow on here, which is applying to the contents in the folder. So you can see it's on the edges of these bandana shapes. You get a little bit of a drop shadow. You can double click here to change the opacity, the distance, the size, the spread if you feel the need to. Let's open it up and take a look at what we have inside here. So we have border shape layers. change stroke color. So the border shape layers is basically everything that you see here where there is a bandana texture. I just have shape layers positioned and scaled like this, that if you turn off you can see that I have the bandana texture clipped to. So if I turn off the bandana texture, you just see the shapes. If you need to move or scale these, you can. Make them bigger, smaller, move them around, rotate them. You can do any of that. If you decide that you would like the bandana texture to apply to the entire background, this bottom folder here, full coverage option, just turn it on, and that's what you'll get. Let's see, we have the bandana pattern overlay. I have a certain amount of levels or contrast applied here to get the look. If I turn it off, you can see it's a little duller. So you can turn it off, or you can open this up and play with the levels if you want it to look different than I have it by default. Otherwise, you'll just want to use this layer here, change color of bandana pattern, to change the color of the bandana pattern. So it's very simple. Just double click the box, use the slider, and pick your color. And next we have a add school logo here option. So if we turn that on, it looks like I have one or two out of place, but these are just sample images anyways. You want to obviously turn off all of these sample images, and you'll want to drag and drop your PNG or extracted school logo into this folder. So if you've done that and you have one that you're working with, basically you'll want to scale and position it. This is probably a good starting point. And from there you'll just need to duplicate as many as you need. So I'm on Mac. I like to hold down Option and then just click and drag up. So you see this blue line, let go. That's a quick and easy way to duplicate. I'm sure there's a similar method or option on Windows, but you can always right click and select duplicate layer as many times as you need to. So as you duplicate, you can just position them, rotate them how you want them. Just keep repeating that process until you fill up the spaces. And like I said earlier, if you need the bandana shapes to be positioned differently to make room for your logo, you can come down here and work with these layers by scaling and rotating and moving them if you need to. So we'll turn that off. We already talked about the drop shadow, so we are done with the far background layers. Let's keep it moving and look at the inner background layers. So this inner background refers to this inside this framed section here. There is a layer mask that is not linked by default that you can see here, which just masks out the border area. So if I were to hold down Shift, click on it, well, actually the contents don't actually extend beyond the layer mask, but it's to make sure that nothing nothing covers this area. But if you select the layer mask with it not being linked to the folder, you can bring it in or move it if you need to. So you can adjust the frame that's inside there. More than likely you won't need to do that. There is a drop shadow, so you can see down here at the bottom it just adds a little dimension to it, which you can adjust the drop shadow. Just double click to get your layer style window pulled up. By default stroke is turned off, but you can turn it on, and you can kind of see that it gives you just a border here. You can edit the stroke by double clicking the word stroke. You can edit the size here on this slider, and then of course you can change the color right here in this box. Pretty simple. Let's see what else we have. We need to open it up. Let's look at what we have in here. So by default we've got a couple layers turned off, but let's go to the very bottom and let's see. We've got change color of inner background. It has this mask here. So very simple, double click, select the color that you want. Next we have circle option. So what that's referring to is this, just this circle here with a stroke outline. It kind of frames the back behind your subject. So to change the color, you don't have to open anything up. Just double click this word color overlay and you can make the color anything you want. What I typically like to do is make it just a little bit darker than the background. If you make it, you know, too drastically different, I mean, there might be situations, but you don't want to get too carried away with it. Might be a little bit too distracting, but I think it looks good just a slightly darker, or if you have a darker background, maybe slightly lighter. Just not a big variance, but it just depends on what you're going for. Let's see, if we open it up, we've got basically two circles that make up that, but you shouldn't need to do anything with that. If you choose to not use the circle, which is a little more generic, you can turn that off and you can turn on the folder above it, which is add school logo or letter option. And so what I mean by that is that I have a text layer in here with the Collegiate FLF font. You can use any font that you want, but you can make the letter anything that's an M. And so you might need to widen. Well, that's not the right one here. You might need to widen that and center it, but you can basically update it to any letter that you want. Let's get it back the way that it was. You also have the option to use your school logo, so you would turn the letter off and you would drag and drop your school logo in here, scale it and position it how you want it. Right now we've got a color overlay, so if you turn it off you can see what it's showing here. It just depends on your logo on if you want to use the color overlay or not, but it is on, so if you don't want it, make sure you turn it off. If you do want it, just click on it and select the color that you want it to be, depending on how much you want it to show up. Same thing applies. Typically just a little bit darker or just a little bit lighter than your background color is what's going to look the best. Let's see, let's close that up. Here we have a lighten upper background option. So in some of my sample images, this helped, made it look better, but not all of them. But it is an option that's there. You can turn this on. If you do make it a single subject image, you can move it down or move it around. But it's just a little, very subtle kind of a spotlight effect. It is optional. Here we have our corner accents, which you can turn them off if you don't want them. It's kind of a vintage feel, vintage look, or old school. We've got them labeled top left, top right, bottom left, bottom right, but if you want to change the color, just do it on the layer folder here. Double click. Same thing, just a little bit lighter, a little bit darker, usually looks best. There are some occasions where you might want a big difference or variance in how, or contrast, but just click on this and you can set it to any color that you like. And what else? So that's our corner accents. We have covered pretty much everything in this folder. So let's come up here. We've got a paper texture overlay. Now this adds a paper texture which is very subtle. You can kind of see what's going on if you zoom in. It does darken everything slightly, so if you turn it off you can see it brightens it up a little bit, but you lose that texture. So if you have it on and you've adjusted all of your colors, you can decrease the opacity if you want just a little less of the effect, or you can come into the levels and play with your lights, midtones, and darks, also blacks and whites here. Fine tune it if you feel the need to, but that is a paper texture overlay. Next we have a levels vignette, so let's get everything back the way that it was. Let's do fit on screen. Okay, so our levels vignette just kind of darkens and saturates the very outer corners Same thing with our exposure. There's a few ways that you can adjust this. You can always decrease it by reducing the opacity if you want less of the effect. If you want more, just double click on each of them and use the sliders. You can really darken it up if you want to draw the eye in to the center or to the subject. Same thing with the levels. Just keep in mind that with the levels, like if I bring these blacks down, it really can affect the saturation as well, which may or may not look good. Just depends. And then of course you can always scale it out, scale it in. But more than likely you can leave it just the way that it is. Next, we have our upper subject images, pretty self-explanatory. You will place all the subject images that you will have displayed on the upper half. Right now there is a layer mask, and that keeps the head from extending over this border, which I think I still have the stroke turned on. Let's turn that off. If you want the subject image to be able to extend, hold down Shift and click on the layer mask. That will turn that layer mask off, and now you can see his head does extend above this frame. There is a drop shadow, so it's subtle. If I turn it off, you can see what happens. Turn it back on. You can open it up and adjust it if you want to or need to, or you can turn it off, but it will apply and just add a little extra dimension. But you will want to place your subject images in this subfolder that is inside the primary folder. And the reason there's a subfolder is because I needed to use two layer masks. One which is for the frame or the border, and another which allows your subject to gradually fade into the background color. Now by default this layer mask is unlocked or unlinked, so that allows you to select this layer mask, click on any of these anchor points. You can hold down Shift and just click and drag it down. So if you want more to show or if you want less to show, you can see if you come up here, then it'll start to show at the bottom. But another option you have is to click on the anchor point itself and move it up and move it down. That makes the transition less gradual, but that's another way that you can do it. Now as you can see, there's a layer mask on the lower subject, so if you come down too far, then your upper subject will start to show through, so just be careful and keep all of that in mind. But the layer masks are adjustable, and just like all the other tutorial videos, I explain that you can always actually use your gradient tool to adjust this. So if you have your mask selected and you go to your gradient tool, make sure that you're using black to white or white to black, and then you can just click and drag up, and you can just keep doing it until you get it exactly how you like it. But that's always an option as well. All right, let's keep it moving. Next we have some color grading options, which I've been using in most of my templates recently. This is a color lookup, which is warm contrast. You can turn it off. You can see it's very subtle, but it just loses some of its warmth, some of its contrast. Now I have this set at 20%. You can increase it or you can decrease it, just depending on what looks good, or you can turn it off completely. I also have a solid color layer that is clipped to the subject folder, and it is set to soft light. I have the opacity pretty high because it just looks good with the reds. But if you do a different color, you can change this color. You usually would stick with reds, oranges, yellows, or if you're going for a cool look, you can stick in the blues. Just depends, but you can find a shade that looks good. If it looks bad, just keep in mind that you can reduce this opacity so it's a little less of the effect. So that's definitely something, if you use it, you're probably going to want to fine tune it. But I think if you look and see drastic difference if I turn those off. Now I could edit my subject images differently so that they just look better when I drop them in here. But this allows me to get like a blanket color grade adjustment that will apply to all of my subjects. All right, what's next? We've got wrinkle overlays. I have a layer mask that hides these wrinkle textures from showing on the border. You can change that if you need to, but more than likely probably not going to want to adjust any of this. You can adjust the levels if your colors if it's showing up too much or too little. You play with the levels or adjust the opacity. You can also, with your move tool, select and move them around. Now you can see they do overlap the upper subject, so you want to be careful there. I have one that actually you can see is coming over this area, and so if we find that particular one, which I think, yeah, is this second one, you may or may not want to adjust or move that depending on what you want overlapping your subject, or you can turn any of them off. More than likely you won't need to do anything with that. Next we have our middle text layers. Move up for single image. We kind of already talked about that, but let's open it up. And I think I want to fix this layer mask before we do that because I changed it and it's showing a little bit too much. Yeah, something like that. Okay, so now let's look at the middle text layers. So we've got our upper subtext, which is where it says Wichita Falls High School. It has an arch to it. You probably want to start by putting in your team name. So let's see. Let's say we've got a new school this coming year called the Mavericks. So we'll go with that. Now it's obviously too big, so you can use your character panel and change the value here, say 300, or sometimes I just like to use my move tool and click on the anchor point, hold down shift, and scale it how I want it. Now, both the team name and the upper subtext, they have an arch set to them. So if you need to adjust that, just double click in this icon here, and so that it's all highlighted. Once you do that, up here on the top, you will see this available to you. So if you click it, you'll get your warp text window, and you can adjust the level of the bend. So we're at +8 if you need more or less. Pretty simple. And then once you edit your upper text, you can adjust the bend so that it fits. So let's go back. To change the color, it's pretty simple. Up here in your character panel, also in this little bar, this new thing we have, you can see it. Or if you ever select all of the text, you'll get an option here, but just get your color box and pick what you want. There is a drop shadow which is on there, and that, I've got a white text over a white uniform, so I needed something to make it stand out. So I added this drop shadow. It is adjustable like any drop shadow. So you double click the word drop shadow, and I've got opacity full, but you can play with the distance and the size, all of that, or you can turn it off if you don't need it. Team name, we've got some effects here. So there's 2 drop shadows. You can adjust those if you want or need to, but by default we've got gradient overlay turned off. So if you wanted to use a gradient where it's kind of a darker shade at the bottom up into a lighter shade towards the top, you can turn that on. By default it is this red, but you can pick any gradient you want, or you can come down here, click on each one, and set it to a gradient that you want. So let's say if we were sticking with the whites, we might go with a little bit of a very light gray, and then click on this right hand side here. Then, well, let's see, which one are we working with? Okay, yeah, click on this right side here, click on the box, go with a bright white. Just depends on what color scheme you're going with, but you have the option to do that. Turn that gradient back off. What else was there? There was, oh, it's on. We have an inner shadow if you need that. or want that, you might turn off the drop shadow. Having a drop shadow and an inner shadow is a little weird sometimes, but if you want a different look, you can turn off both drop shadows, if I can get it to cooperate, and then just go with the inner shadow. It's an option. And then there is an option for a stroke outline. Now that's white on white, so you can't really see it, but if you double click it, you can change the color and get a stroke outline if you want that. So a few options that are built in but turned off by default. And then our subtext is pretty simple. You've got the drop shadow, which you can adjust. It's not arched. You can arch it if you want to. But the main thing is, let's see, basketball. I'm trying to think of something longer. I don't know anybody. Somebody out there does figure skating. I just thought of something long. Now it doesn't fit, so you can either come up here and reduce the size of your text, or come here to, I believe it's kerning, and adjust the space between your letters. Right now it's at 1300. You could try, say, 1000, and that might work. You might want to go a little less at 900, and you can get really detailed, and you can do 923. Whatever works for the word that you have in there that makes it fit and look the best. Let's see, whoops, turn that off, and that is the contents of the middle text. I think that covers everything. We do have a texture overlay that is clipped to the middle text, so if you zoom in, you can see it's just a little bit of a distressed grunge. I have a levels adjustment. You can reduce opacity or play with the levels if you want to, and then you can also turn it off if you want it really super clean. And then we have our lower or single subject image. So you just drop the subject images that you want to appear on this lower portion, scale and position, pretty straightforward. You can adjust this layer mask if you unlock or unlink it. Just like we talked about before, you can move it up and move it down, or the whole thing if you need to. Let's see, same thing here. We've got the same, it's a color lookup, but color grading options, and just as we talked about down here, they're the same. So you can make them match. Just make sure that they have the same values as far as the opacity. Up here, same thing with opacity, or also the color code. You can copy and paste it so that they match. Now in this case, I've got 30% on the lower and I've got 50% on the upper. You know, you may not want them exactly the same, but you can look at it and see what looks best. We're almost done. Lower text. Let's look at it real quick. So we've got our first name, which does not have the arch. You can add it if you want to. It has a drop shadow. Very simple. You just change all of these text layers. You just change the color the simple way in your character panel, or in this little bar we have here for all of these. And there are drop shadows that you can adjust if you want to. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. We've got our number here. So I've got it set up so you can have their jersey number, and then over it you can have their classification: senior, junior, sophomore, freshman, etc. You can turn any of them off. And then the very bottom one, we have the year. So for basketball, it usually overlaps from one year to another. You can do single year. Any of these you can adjust the space in between the characters. But typically it would probably just be the year. It's really pretty simple. And these text layers also have the texture overlay to add the grunge or the distressed look, which can also be adjusted the same way with opacity, or by coming into the levels if you need to. All right, so that is it. Try to do that quickly. We'll just touch on the memory mate and we'll wrap it up. So let's jump into that memory mate real quick. All right, so if you watched any of my other tutorial videos, you're probably already very familiar with this, but just in case, when you are going to create, which actually I need to have this one red. if you're going to create a memory mate, you want to start with your 5x4 horizontal file, and you want to create your team image. You want to save it as a JPEG, and once you have your team image created, now you can start working with the memory mate file. So we've got this folder here that says insert 5x4 team JPEG here. If you open it up, you can see that we have our sample image here, which you can leave on for now or turn it off, but I've got this on my other screen here. We'll just to demonstrate, I've got my saved team image. All I'm going to do is drag and drop, and because I had the initial one selected, it placed it just above it. Now it's just a matter of scaling it, which you can scale it exactly the same, or you can make it smaller or bigger. But you can also use the sample one as a reference just to get everything in place. Of course, you want to turn off or maybe even delete the original sample, but that's how you get your team image in there and place it. Now, there's a drop shadow that can be adjusted if you want to, or you can turn it off. The only other thing is if you want a right now I would call this right oriented with your subject on the right hand side. If you want it to be left, what I would do is select this red folder here by holding shift, along with the layer above it, layer folder above it, which is your lower text, and I would move it together, and this will just keep everything centered up and lined up, so you don't have to worry about that. We'll just move it over to the right hand side, and then you can select your subject image or images and slide them over. Now he's facing the opposite direction, which looks a little bit weird, so just so you can see, if we flip them around, that's what it would look like. And I think that's it. Hopefully I have covered everything, and as always, if I have not and you still have questions, I welcome you to shoot me an email, don@thirdcreative.com. And until the next one, thanks for joining me on this one. See ya.